Take Action Real Estate Podcast, episode 26.
Hey Brian, welcome to the podcast. How you doing today?
Good, John. Good. Thanks for having me.
So Brian Urbanski we have here. Brian has experience in a lot of different facets of real estate. Today we're going to be focusing mostly on lease options because he's done a lot of them. Also a topic that my business partner Brian Reitler here we've talked a lot about, we've been very interested in for a couple of years really, and we really just haven't jumped on it. So we're personally kind of invested in this. We're very interested in what Brian here has to say.
Well, I think there's definitely some deals that have come across our table that we feel like, wow, that might be something that works for that, but we're not really sure how to make it happen. So hopefully we take some pointers away from here to make our first one happen here pretty soon.
Well, I think lease options, they're an arrow in our quiver. You know, they're a tool in the toolbox that we can pull out depending on what our business model is and what our goals overall are. For me, I love doing lease options because lease options give me the ability to find a somewhat higher quality tenant who is at least putting their money where their mouth is. Instead of paying the 1 or 2 month security deposit, they're typically paying, on a home in the Ohio area. Now this does not apply to California, but in Ohio, $100,000 to $150,000 home, particularly in the Central Ohio area, is a nice home. You're in a nice area. You probably got 3 bedrooms, 15 to 1,700 square feet, and I would much prefer dealing with people that have an ownership mentality than a straight rental mentality. And that will give me a little bit more peace of mind knowing that the property is going to be taken care of. They're going to be a little bit more reliable on payments. But most importantly, what I like is the fact that instead of getting that security deposit, what I'm actually getting is a chunk of money. It might be a $3,000, $5,000. I mean, I've gotten as much as $15,000 up front on $150,000, $200,000 home, which represents percentage-wise a pretty strong amount of money. And most people that are going to put that kind of money up front are going to be serious about getting their credit in shape and being able to do what they need to do to eventually own the home.
Right. Before we get into too many more lease options, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your business, personal, whatever you're interested in.
Well, I appreciate that. I've been since, my goodness, I don't know, 2nd or 3rd grade. I've always been fascinated with sales and marketing, and for most of my working career, which has been a lot longer than I like to admit, I've always been involved in some kind of sales and marketing capacity. I started in real estate investing in 2002 on a fluke. I was in between businesses, and as an entrepreneur, and having been in the advertising and marketing field, I started originally in 1990, graphic design, desktop publishing. I worked for a major hot rod company based here in Columbus in their advertising department, doing their layout and design and typesetting on their mail order catalog for a few years, and then ultimately moved into sales there. And I started, I guess 1994 was when I left. That was my last real job, as I like to say, where I had a W-2 and that kind of thing. And I've been in different sales and marketing capacities, or in different businesses in the sales and marketing capacity. And I would say real estate was probably not my second, or probably my fourth or fifth business roughly in there. And for me personally, I knew nothing about real estate when I got involved. I mean, I had never owned a house before, and for me it was a fluke because I was, like I said, I was in between businesses. I had been on the road as a hired gun, speaking at seminars around the country for a while, and I came back into town. It's fun being on the road, but it's also pretty grueling. I mean,
Right.
You're in 5 different cities in a week. I mean, the constant air travel and hotels and that kind of thing gets old pretty quickly. But a friend of mine, he actually called me like on a Monday or Tuesday. There was a 4-day real estate convention coming up, and he calls me on like Tuesday, and this thing starts on Thursday or Friday. And he says, "Hey Brian, there's this real estate seminar coming up. It's 4 days, and I got a free ticket to it. Do you want to come?" And I'm like, "Dave, what are you talking about? You're giving me a 2-day notice to go to a 4-day conference, and you expect me to be available?" And he was like, "Yeah." I'm like, "Okay, I'll be there." So, at the end of the day, it was very fortuitous. It wasn't that I was so busy, obviously.
So was this one of the big gurus, the late night TV show, real estate guys?
Actually, it was better than that. It was like 15 of these
Ah.
gurus. It was I believe it was the Ohio Real Estate Investors Association
Oh, okay.
back in 2002 when it was held here in Columbus. It's usually in Cincinnati now. But yeah, I went there Thursday and Friday, and in these events, basically what they are, they're big giant pitchathons. It's very inexpensive to get in. It's $100 or $200 for 4 days, and there's a lot of good information in there. But what they're really doing is they're sharing different types of strategies like lease options, land contracts, how to rehab, how to buy and sell notes, how to buy tax lien certificates, all these different things, and you can pick and choose what you think makes the most sense for you to do in your business, whether you're brand new like I was, or maybe seasoned pros like you guys are, and maybe you've never done notes before and you want to expand your business into those waters. And so I'm looking and I'm seeing all this stuff about landlording, which sounds like a whole lot of work, and rehabbing, which sounds like a whole lot more work, and a lot of things that were really confusing to me. Like I mentioned, there were tax lien certificate people, there were people there talking about how to do probate deals. And it wasn't until, I want to say, the afternoon of the third day, where I saw this thing, this process called Subject 2. And what Subject 2 is, it's when you buy a property subject to the existing mortgage, and when you, basically, in order to get somebody to do that, they have to be very highly motivated to sell, because essentially what you're doing is saying, Mr. Seller, go ahead and deed me your property for free or for just a little bit of money, because usually these are not real high equity deals to begin with. And I promise to make the payment. And if I don't make the payment, the bank's going to take my house and it's going to trash your credit. So how does that sound?
Right.
Okay, so I mean, I'm oversimplifying, obviously, but that's essentially the situation. And when you do Subject 2 deals, if you don't make the payment, it's not going to hurt your credit, but it is going to hurt the credit of the person whose home you buy.
Right.
And as such, there's a big responsibility when you're doing Subject 2. And the reason I'm talking about Subject 2 in particular is because that leads into lease options. So the only thing, and I saw lease options too at that conference, and that seemed a little bit confusing to me, because again, I'm brand new to real estate, never purchased a house, never been involved in the business really in any capacity. So I'm hearing a Subject 2, wow. So because I had no money, I had no experience. I did have some time, because like I said, I was in between businesses. Fortunately, my wife was paying our payments and everything, and we were kind of surviving for a while on her income. And I said, you know what, the Subject 2 thing makes sense. So I went out and did a bunch of advertising and did signs and did a little bit of direct mail, but mostly I did these flyers. I don't know if you've ever seen those flyers that have the coupons in them on Saturdays that show up on your mailbox. Well, I thought, that seems like a great way to kind of carpet bomb certain neighborhoods, these new build areas, because this would have been 2002 going into 2003. And I did a bunch of marketing and advertising and worked full time. January, no deals. February, no deals. March, no deals. And I'm spending money like a drunken sailor on all kinds of marketing, and that, when I say drunken sailor, I'm talking like, I had maybe $3,000 or $4,000 available across all my credit cards and my wife's credit cards at the time, and we basically maxed those out. This is a true story. And we got to a point that was like the end of March, and I'm saying to myself, my gosh, I don't know if this thing's really going to work. I've gotten some calls, but I really haven't, gotten anything that looks like it might be a deal. And so I'm here looking at Marshall. I'm like, you know what? I got to replenish my marketing funds. So I'm looking at maybe getting a job. We had a storm, a big hailstorm. So I was looking at becoming a contractor, just going out knocking on doors. And I thought, hey, you know what? If I can learn about roofs, replacing roofs, that'd be a great way to start into this business. And I can meet contractors and sort of be some on-the-job training while, making some money to do some more marketing. Right. And I actually talked to a couple of these companies, and then in April, something really weird happened. I got a check, and I got a check for $4,500 on a property that I hadn't even closed on. I was going to meet them at 6 o'clock, and I met the tenant buyer at like 1:30 or 2. So technically, I said that, hey, I'm about to close on this. I'll go ahead and hold on to your funds. If for whatever reason it doesn't close, I'll give you your money back. And they're like, okay, that's fine. And I didn't deposit the check at that point in time. Long story short, I had the meeting. I bought the property. It was actually not my first. It was my second property that I bought, subject to. The first one I bought, but they were going to stay. They needed to stay for 3 or 4 months, and they were going to keep paying the mortgage, even though I owned it. But anyway, I bought that second property, and I got a check for $4,500, and that was like, you know, about what I'd spent over the last 3 months or 4 months in marketing, and I was like, wow, this stuff really works. And from that, it was just Katie bar the door. And what I realized that I didn't see at the time was that in this business, it's not like you go to work today and you get paid tomorrow. Okay, you go to work today and tomorrow and next week and next month, and depending on what you're doing, especially with rehab, you guys do a ton of rehabs yourselves, and those can take weeks and sometimes months. And then once they're rehabbed, then they got to be sold.
Right.
And
even
so
marketing alone is, I mean, it has to build on itself. I mean, in the first
Yeah.
couple of years, we were sending out mailers, and I mean, the website that we have, I mean, I think the first couple of years we had maybe a couple leads from that, but now we get more than half from that. You know, it just builds on itself the more effort and resources you put into it.
it does, and the focus and doing, you know, obviously podcasts and pay-per-click and all these things. You know, marketing is an art as much as it is a science, and it's about figuring out the mix. It's not just, there's not just one thing. People say, you know, what's the best thing, you know, best way to market? And we all have our favorite strategies, and you know, for me it's direct mail, but I still do online. I still do other types of advertising. I've done, oh my goodness, I mean, you name it. I've had a radio show. I've done billboard advertising, radio advertising, TV, and a lot of these are really expensive, and most of them don't work very well.
And so I'm curious, how do you get from, you know, so your second deal, how did you convince the person to, you know, deed their house to you, and then it sounded like you found a tenant buyer before you even closed on it. So let's hear a little bit more about that transaction.
I probably ought to clarify that. I don't want people out there thinking that I'm advertising houses I don't actually own. But what had happened was I bought the first house, subject to, and I advertised it, and I owned it. I had the deed. The people were still living there. They were still going to be making the payments for the next 3 or 4 months. So I wasn't making any money on it, but we did the transaction. And that was the property that I advertised because I could. I owned it. And this was, I guess, 2003, so, you know, the internet wasn't what it is today in 2018. So I had a couple, actually a family, call and say, hey, we're interested in a property, but this one isn't in the right school district or the right location. Do you have anything over here? And as luck would have it, I was talking with somebody for a couple of weeks. I said, well, you know what, I'm supposed to be closing on this property here probably in the next week or two. Does this make sense to you? And I said, you know, I can't let you in to see it, but I can. You can drive by, and you know, I can. You know, I tell you how many bedrooms and baths and that sort of thing. And they really needed a place, so they said, yeah, we'll go ahead and do that. And when I bought it, it was a situation where the seller was having a lot of financial difficulties. They were going through a divorce. There was a custody battle with their kid, who was a 16-year-old. He was troubled because of the family situation. He was getting in trouble, and they needed a way out immediately. And it was basically, he said to me, if you want the house, you can have it. There wasn't a whole lot of equity. It was probably an 8-year-old home. It was one of those newer subdivisions that they had been building in the 90s and 2000s. And he said, if you want it, it's yours. If you don't, you know, the bank can have it, and I don't care if it burns down. I mean, that was literally the attitude. So in our world, that's called a highly motivated seller.
Right.
He's
Low-hanging
done.
fruit.
The low-hanging fruit. And today, that's all I work with. Back then, you know, I'd talk to anybody. Even if they, you know, were asking full price on MLS, I'd still talk to them to see if I could do a deal. And today, I only work with that low-hanging fruit, those highly motivated sellers. I don't want motivated, I want highly motivated sellers. So, right place, right time. Got the deal, and the tenants were tickled pink. And $4,500. I think the house was maybe $110 or $120. That's a pretty good, you know. That's almost like a 3% Fannie Mae kind of a mortgage down payment. And they were really good tenants for about 3 years, and then something happened, and I think they had some difficulties and ended up getting divorced. And I got the house back, and it was a wash, rinse, repeat kind of a situation. So, in hindsight, that was kind of like a textbook transaction, for me. I got the property, got the tenant buyer. There was really no lag time at all. They were ready to move. So within, I don't know, 2 or 3 weeks, he was out. And we actually, the thing I love about lease options is in some cases, assuming it's habitable, okay, I don't want to put somebody in a house that doesn't have a furnace, but as long as the property is habitable, you can avoid a lot of make-ready costs like painting and even cleaning carpets and stuff. Now, if it's a situation for, we deal with properties, you guys do and we do, that are trashed. I mean, that, need to have the carpet ripped out and the enzymes put in the hardwood and that kind of thing because of the pets. But if you've got a property that's at least, reasonably habitable and it's cosmetic stuff, I've put people in homes with no, on lease options with no appliances whatsoever. And I said, well, I can get some appliances. I'm like, no, don't do that. We're taking some from where we already are.
Right.
Instead of putting them in storage, we'll just use them in your house. And I'm like, okay, I just saved, $1,500 on a stove, refrigerator, and a dishwasher because they had all of those things. So it's really, lease options are really cool. They're flexible, and you can kind of create any transaction that you want based on the nature of the house and the people that you're marketing to.
Right.
So I'm curious, when you get a house, I'm assuming not all of your properties that you're getting lease options and tenant buyers in, they're not all on subject to situations.
Correct.
So you're buying houses with cash or with hard money, maybe, different private lenders, just like
Correct.
a lot of investors. And how do you transition that house to sort of a stable situation financially? Because those tend to be higher interest, more expensive, and it probably doesn't make sense for a long-term solution.
That's very insightful, Brian. And for me personally, I probably should have said this at the outset. In my heart of hearts, I'm a buy and hold guy. I do rehabs, I do lease options and creative financing, a lot of different things. But at the end of the day, I like the concept of owning real estate and having somebody pay it off over time. Okay, and it's essential fundamental basis. That's what real estate is about. And it's about cash flow and depreciation and tax benefits and other things too. But at the end of the day, you build up a portfolio over time. Other people are paying that off. And typically, what I'll do when I first started, remember I told you I wasn't really interested in any of these different or these real estate business models, except subject to. And that's what I built my business around. In fact, we bought, I say we, basically me, myself, and I, and my wife was, helping with the books while she was working full-time in corporate America to keep the doors open. We probably purchased our first year, I'm really going back here. I want to say probably 7 or 8 properties, and then the next year I think we had probably 15 more. So we grew real fast.
And they were all subject to.
These were all subject tos.
Did you lease option on all of them as well?
Everyone. And the reason I did lease options was because, let's think of the time frame. This is 2002. What was going on with the market in 2002?
It was getting ready to.
It was going up. Okay, it was really strong starting in 2001 because of all this, basically free money that the banks were giving out. Which brings me to my favorite book, The Big Short, which actually got turned into a movie, which documents that criminality by our banking system. But anyway, they were building houses left and right, and anybody, literally unemployed janitors, could get mortgages on houses. And they were giving houses away because they had all this money, millions and billions of dollars from around the world that was getting out of the stock market from the dot-com bust, and it had to go somewhere. So it went into real estate. And there were all these houses being built everywhere. I know this is a little bit before when you guys got actively involved. But, I mean, it was like you couldn't, in some parts of Columbus, like Grove City, from this one intersection, I think it's Holton Alkire, I mean, they must have, in a 1 mile radius, there must be like 3,000 or 4,000 homes that were built within a 3 or 4 year period of time. It was just a ton of oversupply. And so these people, when you have a house that is in an area that's being built up, you buy that house, how much equity do you have on a 30-year mortgage in 3 years? Yeah. None. You're actually negative when you figure you're going to have to pay commissions and closing fees and costs and stuff. So it was very easy to get these deals. They weren't high equity deals, but guess what the market was doing? The market was going like this. So what I would do is I'd buy the property, basically take over the payments. Right. There might be some equity. It might actually be worth 140 and they only owe 120 or 125. But in the real world, that's no equity after commissions, fees, closing costs, points, all this financing fees. But if I can buy that and I can have somebody in it while the values are going up, and the mortgage is being paid down almost minimally, but what I was banking on was the appreciation, and we were getting real strong appraisals back then. And so the game plan was I can get these properties for free, basically. Sometimes people would even pay me to take the house, $3, $4, $5 grand on a subject to. Now let me ask you a question. Why would somebody pay me to take their house?
Yeah, they just wanna get out and save their credit and.
Save the credit, excellent. But the other side of it is selling it traditionally is not viable. Because when you figure it's gonna cost you about 10%, they can't.
They're gonna have to bring money to the table to close.
Or they're gonna go into foreclosure, and they don't want foreclosure. And that's the biggest thing. Again, subject to, you have to be, I don't wanna make this a subject to discussion, obviously, but that was integral in my business model. The reason I did lease options was because I was doing subject to, and my goal and my game plan, and it worked until it didn't, when the market crashed, was to bring these people in, ride it out for 2 or 3 years to get that appreciation, which was going up very rapidly, and then to turn around and sell it, and then get money on the back end. So I was basically getting a house for free, which was good because I had no money to begin with. So I was getting a free house, and they were nice homes in nice areas, Southwest City schools, Hilliard schools, not necessarily the hood, the ghetto kind of properties we think about when you're talking about cash flowing properties. And the cash flow wasn't that great. It was maybe 50 or $100, but I wasn't getting them from the cash flow. I was getting them from the appreciation and those option fees. Because back then it was a lot easier to get $4,000, $5,000, $6,000 up front on a home that really only needed probably paint and carpet to begin with. These were not rehab properties, very habitable. I could lease option them as is, and either the people would cash out, and then I would make a little bit of money on the back end as well.
When you say cash out, you mean they actually ended up buying the property?
Bingo.
Because that was going to be my question. When you're banking on the appreciation, when they sign the lease option, don't you have a price already on the contract?
Absolutely.
So you're not going to gain all that appreciation if they go forward with the purchase.
That's a very good observation, but what price do you think we're putting on the contract?
Something higher than retail at that time.
Well, what we're doing, we do one of two things. We either say, okay, Mr. Tenant Buyer, we have a property here that we have seen for the last 5 years, let's say, average appreciation has been 3% or 4%, whatever it is. And you gotta remember, appreciation back then was really high. And I would say, my realtor, Mr. Smith over here says that, or the Columbus Board of Realtors says that we've had average appreciation of 5% over the last 5 years. Now, I can't promise or guarantee that, but we're gonna build that in. We're gonna assume 3 years from now that we're gonna have 15% appreciation. So instead of selling you this $100,000 house that I owe $85,000 on for $100,000 today, we're gonna sell it for $115,000, and you're gonna pay $115,000 in 3 years from now. So the appreciation's built in. So I've got a $20,000 or $30,000 spread. Not a huge spread. Certainly not the spreads we see in rehabbing. But how much did I get the house for?
Right.
Nothing.
And then there's no realtor's fees.
And there's no commissions. That's the beauty.
Probably no request to remedy because they already live there.
Yeah,
so you're saving a lot of.
$150,000 house, you're saving what, $9,000?
Dude.
Yeah.
I mean, if everything falls into place. Yeah. The answer is yes. So it was a way for me, with no experience and no money, to get houses for free. They had to be, I was forced into buy and hold because I couldn't buy them and then turn around and sell them. Because even if I sold them for sale by owner, there's just not enough equity there to make any money on the deal. And these tenants, if you think it's hard to get, even in today's market, 2018, which may be cooling a bit, but there's still high demand. My gosh, when you start going into lease options, rent, which is another word for rent to own, my goodness, it's like you don't have enough people to handle the phone calls. We were getting 40 and 50 and 60 calls a week per house, and sometimes we had, 4, 5, 6 houses that were coming online. It was crazy. It's just, I mean, we literally had to everything was going to voicemail. Then we had a call. We used Pat Live for a while as a call center because we couldn't handle the deals. Now, the challenge with the lease options is that who are you dealing with? Are you dealing with the upper echelon of credit or the lower? You're dealing with the lower. So you have people that the only reason they're doing rent to own is because they want to own, they want to be in Hilliard schools or Southwest City schools, but they don't have the cash today. and they don't have the credit today to get a mortgage, but they make a commitment, a good faith commitment that over the next 1 to 2 to 3 years, and we initially did 3-year lease options, and I would say historically about 5 to 10% of them actually cashed out, and the rest of them, life situations come up, losing jobs, getting divorced, sick, hurt, this, that, something else. I got to go to Denver to take care of a sick, parent or something like that. And at the end of the day, lease options, while my goal is to help these people every way that I can, whether I'm referring them to credit repair companies or credit counseling services or whatever, I want them to buy the house because I have a back end that I want to cash out. And frankly, on the pretty houses, now I did get them, the cool thing is I got them for free, or low cost. No commissions or anything involved, and they're pretty homes in nice areas that we would, not mind living in. And
Right.
and the inventory was, I could get as many properties as I can manage. It was not hard with all the building going on to find people that needed to leave but were underwater. So the people that were paying me to buy their house was because it was cheaper to pay me $3,000 than to come to the table with $15,000
Right.
for commission, closing costs, and a lower price to compete with these brand new homes right across the street.
Right.
So sub two, I didn't mean to get so deep into sub two, but it was integral in my business
Sure.
model, and even today it works very well for if you get lower equity properties, and that you want to do for long-term holds, that you're going to have appreciation in the Columbus school market, the suburban markets. They're great long-term holds.
So
But-
you said that you have about a 90% of people they don't actually exercise their lease option.
Yeah,
That is
really, that's
historically.
Yeah.
Historically, that's what we've seen. And in talking to other Columbus, now I can't say for Denver or Miami or San Diego, but in Columbus, Ohio, my experience and the experience of many other investors that I personally know that do lease options, they're anywhere from, on the low end to 5% to maybe as high as 15. But again, it's going to depend on how strict you are working with people. I'd take someone with a 500 credit score, and I would say, hey, there's no way you're going to be able to get this thing financed so you get your score here, and you've got 3 years to do it. Now, in 3 years, I'm not going to necessarily kick you out, Mr. Smith, you and your family, but we're probably going to have, the price is probably going to have to change. The price is probably going to go up on the property. The rent's probably going to go up, because normally I lock them in for 3 years, but you can bump the rent 50. You can put it in the agreement, the lease agreement.
Sure,
you bump it $50 a year or 75 bucks or three,
whatever,
whatever you want to do.
So you have to record that lease?
Record it.
It's my understanding any lease that's over 3 years or 2.5 years, it has to be recorded with the recorder's office?
No, it doesn't have to be recorded. Typically, I never record the option agreement, but the seller or the tenant buyer could if they wanted to make a memo. Whether, I don't know that we may have had 1 or 2 or 3 people over the years do that, but at the end of the day, for all intents and purposes, it's a lease. A lease with option to purchase it's called a unilateral agreement. What that means is that it goes one way. So it means I'm leasing the property to you, and I have to lease it to you for the length of our lease term. And if you qualify for a mortgage, I have to sell it to you. It doesn't matter how much the property may be appreciated more than I even sold it to you for. It doesn't matter if it's worth $1 million.
Sure.
I have to sell it to you, but with the option, you don't have to buy, and that's different than lease purchase and land contract and contract for deed.
So I wanted to ask, I think the one question everybody always asks about subject to is the due on sale clause.
Yes.
So have you ever had a bank call a note on you?
And I have never had a bank call a note on me.
Okay.
And what we would do, but let me say this, okay? I'm not an attorney, and I don't even play one on TV or on podcasts. However, I have a lot of experience, not just in dealing with subject to and lease options, but in foreclosure litigation and certainly in eviction court. And when you do a subject to deal, since 1980, I think it was the Garn-St. Germain Act, is when, because everybody was doing assumable loans, you could just take over the loan and the bank didn't have any say in it in a lot of these cases, because all they wanted to do was make sure they were getting a payment. But if you guys may not remember, but in 1980, interest rates were like 18%. I mean, we squawk about paying 12% to private lenders today.
Mhm.
Could
Yeah.
you imagine being a homeowner and paying 18? I can't even imagine what hard money and private money was then. I mean, you probably had to go to the local mob guy to get a private loan for real estate in 1980,
Right.
but that's why everybody did creative. Everybody did, you know, assumable mortgages and all that kind of a thing. And then obviously over the years, the rates dropped. So with due on sale, the most critical thing you have to do is disclose it to the seller. You have to say, hey, you know what? By transferring the title to me or my company or LLC or trust, the bank could, if they chose, call the note due. In my personal experience, having done dozens and dozens of these deals, I've never ever had a situation with a due on sale close. Knowing as many people as I know in Columbus and even around the country, I've never heard of a subject to deal. I've never heard, I'm not saying it hasn't happened, I've never heard of a bank calling a note due, and I don't think they really would unless it was in default. Because, I mean, especially with the foreclosure tsunami that we just went through in 2008, 9, 10, 11, and 12, the banks were desperate for people to make payments. And in our business, in our practice, we actually send a letter to the bank saying, hi bank, this is ABC Real Estate. We now are going to be making payments to you. We need the statements to come to us, or the payment books need to be sent to us, and we fully disclose to them and let them know we're the ones making the payment on the property. And if they have a problem with that, they could let us know. But at the end of the day, and most of the deals that I do are, from Wells, the mortgage companies are Wells Fargo and Chase and
Right.
GMAC, these big behemoths. The only thing that they care about, honestly, is their monthly payment. Now, if interest rates ever get back up to 12 or 14 or 16%,
Right.
All bets are off.
They're
But
able to cash in that money and
Exactly.
back out at 12%.
But here's what you have to understand about due on sale. It is the option for the bank. It's not mandatory. It's not like if this changes,
Right.
if this transfers, we have to do this. They have the option to do it. And as long as you disclose to the seller, and I have a one-page sheet that gets notarized, that's a disclosure, says, hey, this could happen, so you're taking a risk. It's never happened, to me in all these deals I've done over the years, but it could happen. And if you're okay with that, sign right here and we'll move forward. So the due on sale clause is a boogeyman. However, talk to your legal, accounting, and tax provider before you make any decisions that could get you in trouble.
Gotcha. I was curious too, you mentioned closing on some of these subject to deals. Brian and I, we've done a couple over the years, and it's not that we were looking for them, it just so happened the only way the deal was gonna work for us is to take over the payments to avoid
got it.
some financing costs and stuff.
Mhm.
So we've gone through with a few, and I couldn't find a title company that would help me. They wanted to stay away from it because, from what I understand, their opinion was it's their job to pay off a mortgage when a property changes hands. So we were basically, the property was changing hands, but they weren't paying off the mortgage. So I ended up basically walking all of these through myself. Now on our situations, we were buying them as flips. So we didn't want to hold on to them long term, really, because we were unsure really of the process and everything. And really, the
Sure.
one was out east. It wouldn't have made sense as a rental, anyways. But
But we did keep one of them. We still hold it.
oh yeah, we did. One of them's a rental.
We refinanced it.
We refinanced it within about
Okay.
3 or 4 months, I think. But I was just curious. Your title company has never had an issue closing these, or
No, my title company doesn't have an issue with anything, and that's because and let me tell you why, and I don't mean to sound, flippant about it, but in our business, having the right people on your team is absolutely positively critical. And my current title company, I just closed on our property a couple months ago, and this is a scenario, and I wasn't the first investor, I was like the fourth to have seen this property. Tell me what you guys think about this. Highly motivated seller, active property tax foreclosure, so you're not going to beat that in court even with a stick. The government's getting their money. So property tax foreclosure actively, active Chapter 7 bankruptcy, $15,000 in tax liens against the property, $10,000 in state of Ohio income tax liens on the property, and it was about I think we probably put about $45,000 into it, and it was probably $140,000 property. So does that sound like an exciting hornet's nest that you'd like to jump into the middle of?
sounds like more work than it's probably worth.
Yes, exactly right. Until you realize how motivated the seller really was. She was advertising the property for $60,000 on Zillow, which is where I do some mentoring and around town helping people out. And somebody brought this deal, one of my mentees, if you will, brought me this deal. And I looked at it and I said, you know, these numbers just don't work. I did the bankruptcy and the foreclosure and the clouded title. I love that stuff. Those are deals I want to do. And when I get up in groups, I'm like, hey, if you got a problem child deal that's got all kinds of hair on it, that's really nasty, call me. You know, let me, if it's in foreclosure or it's a zombie foreclosure, I love zombie foreclosures. Don't see a lot of them these days.
What's that?
A zombie foreclosure, this is great. This is when the bank forecloses on the property, and then not only has the homeowner walked away from it, but the bank has walked away from it too. And either they foreclose and they just walk away from the foreclosure process and the case gets dismissed, or the homeowner doesn't make payment, you know, stops making payments. They move in with the grandparents or the cousins or aunts or whatever, and the house is vacant, and the bank just forgets about it. And what's been going on since the market, you know, collapsed in 2008, is that these banks are selling the note to you, then you sell it to Brian, then I sell it, he sells it to me, and I sell it to somebody else. Nobody even knows who owns the doggone note and mortgage anymore. And it was getting so bad, there's actually an organization called MERS, Mortgage Electronic Registration Systems, that was created. I think they hold like 60 million mortgages or something along those lines, because there was so much paper shuffling going on and bundling and all this Wall Street stuff. That, again, I mentioned The Big Short earlier. If you or your listeners haven't seen The Big Short, you got to see The Big Short. It's almost like a documentary with an all-star cast, and it's funny, but it's so true. This is one of the most accurate movies to come out of Hollywood that very truthfully show what happened when the mortgage market collapsed. And so these properties are out there, they're vacant properties, nobody's living in them, and the bank's not foreclosing on them. So who owns them?
Right.
Well, technically the homeowner, but they don't know that because they weren't making payments, they were getting all these, you know, nasty grams from the lender, so they move out, and then and nobody knows whether Bank of America or Wells Fargo or Chase, who owns this note. So they just sit there for years and years, and I've found a lot of those properties. And basically, here I'm going down a rabbit hole, John. You know, essentially you file what's called a quiet title, and a quiet title suit basically says everybody that's on record as an owner, even the auditor, you know, they have an interest with property taxes, gets notified, hey, you know, you need to either state your claim or forever hold your peace. And when those lenders don't respond to, and you have to get service on them, you got to send it to you know, a legitimate address. Mm-hmm. But if they don't show up or they don't respond, the judge will issue an order releasing that lien from the property. Yeah. And then you have essentially a free and clear property minus any property taxes, code enforcement violation, water bills, that kind of thing. You're not going to get it completely free. But I wouldn't mind buying a $100,000 house for, you know, 5 or 10 grand in property taxes and grass cuttings, you know, the $400 grass cuttings from code enforcement. Yeah. Kind of thing. So zombie foreclosures are really cool, but I don't want to digress too much from what we're talking about with these lease options. That whole process tying into subject to, and I want to get back to what you were saying earlier, Brian, about, well, how do you finance this? How do you know, what's your long-term goal? My long-term goal is to buy and hold property. Using subject to and lease options gives me a method where I can get properties, or I can do deals on properties that don't have enough equity for me to fix and flip in the marketplace, but are still houses I'd like to hold. There might be $20,000 or $30,000 worth of equity. I know there's going to be appreciation. I know it's a good area, it's a good school system, and I know that there are a ton of people out there, given the option, will pay top dollar for that house. And you know what? If it doesn't appraise, they either have to bring the difference to the table, or we just sign them for another year or 2 years or whatever the case may be.
Okay.
You see how you can structure.
And all the while, you know, the mortgage is getting paid down and you're gaining equity every year anyways. So.
Bingo. Well, not a lot.
Not a lot, but it builds up over time for sure.
But it's the combination of the appreciation, which is usually higher, and the mortgage pay down.
Yeah. It
just depends on how old. You know, most of the mortgages I took over, you know, still had 25, 26, 27 years left. So your principal is minimal in those until, you know, you get 10, 12, 14 years into it.
So were you signing people up like crazy on the subject twos right after the market hit, or after the market crashed? I'm sorry.
No, I was.
I just feel like there had to be. I mean, your phone had to be ringing off the hook with people who are begging you to take their mortgage off their hands, because obviously, you know, the economy was in a downturn. People were losing their jobs, and especially with the fixed rate or the variable rate interest, and payments were going up and things like that?
Well, the short answer is yes and no. When we marketed to those people, we were getting a ton of those calls coming in. But here's the problem: what did you just preface that question with? What kind of a market was it? What were we in at that time?
It was in a down market.
It's a down market. So where do you think the value in the down market? The values are going down. So most of those, all of those properties had zero equity. Some of them were upside down, and the problem was a lot of these deals had adjustable rate mortgages, and that's a deal killer, because you don't know for a long-term hold, you don't know where interest rates are going to go. Now, obviously, in hindsight, we can see in 2008, 2009, interest rates have only gone up 2 or 3 points, you know, in that entire period of time, and you can still, as of today, with good credit and a little bit of a down payment, you can still get a 4.5%, 5%, or maybe even better than that. If, you know, your credit score, you know, John, you know, probably get a, you know, maybe somewhere in the 4s today. I don't think you'd be able to get into the 3s unless you put just a ridiculous amount of money down. But they're still historically very competitive. So when the market tanked, I was getting out of it. And here's the other side of the story. Here's the rest of the story, as the saying goes. Those properties that I was having appreciation on and a little bit of mortgage paid down, what happened when the market turned, do you think? To my equity, with little equity, with minimal, it went away. And so those properties now we had 2 challenges. Number one, I had little or no equity, which, you know, I still sold some of those properties in the crash for basically nothing. You know, I just pay off. We would do short sales. Some of those deals were done as a short sale. Some of them I didn't get any money on the back end at all, but that was okay, because with the market turning as aggressively as it did, and it wasn't just a Columbus, Ohio thing. It wasn't just, you know, a U.S. thing. It was a global meltdown. So it affected, you know, the stock market, affected housing, it affected the interest rates. I mean, it was a nightmare. And so when I had all these properties and I was trying to sell them, I did run into a major problem. The problem was I had no equity in these properties, so I had no exit strategy. So when I was putting tenants in them, I knew it was going to be a longer term hold. And what happened, there's kind of a confluence of events that took place where we got a lot of properties back in a relatively short period of time in 2007. In 2007 was going to be a banner year for us. We had probably, the beginning of the year, we had, I don't know, 6 or 7 people that were at a point where they could be cashed out like by the fall. I mean, they were getting real close on their scores, and they were working with mortgage brokers and credit repair companies and stuff like that. And all we really would have had to have done was to get to like September or October, and everything would have been fine. Well, guess what happened? IndyMac fails July of 2007, and that was the first domino, or actually I think it was in June. That was the first domino. And then it just rapidly went downhill from there. And I had a bunch of people that could have gotten financed if it would have been just, you know, 6 months later, or 3 months, 4 months later, and we weren't able to get those guys financed. So I was depending on that cash flow to come in to, you know, to be additional capital for us. And we got just a ton of vacancies. Like within a 90-day period of time, we lost like 7 or 8 tenant buyers because the economy was not doing well. A lot of people were losing jobs, and it wasn't just like they were up and leaving in the middle of the night. I mean, they'd be calling and saying, hey, you know, this happened, that happened. And I was like, holy cow. And I think we had like a negative $15,000 a month cash flow.
Oh my.
It's painful just to remember it now. And we could only sustain that for a few months. And we were like, holy cow, what are we gonna do? And so, long story short, what happened was I contacted every one of the sellers. I sent them like this 2 or 3 page letter, said, hey, you know, you don't need me to tell you this. We're, you know, in this economic decline and there's a bunch of problems going on. And, you know, my tenants, and they knew exactly what my strategy was because I told them. I mean, I had like a 23-page packet of information when I bought a house with all kinds of disclosures and waivers and all this stuff. And I said, you know, remember that game plan of renting them out and then selling them? That ain't gonna work because the global economy is melting right now and banks aren't lending money. That was the big problem because in our business, if you don't have cash, I mean, this is a financing business. Mm-hmm. This is a business of banking, and the houses are incidental. But I contacted all these folks and I said, you know, it's bad and it's gonna get worse. What would you like me to do? If you want me to deed you the property back, I'll deed it back to you. And actually 2, 3, 4 people said, yeah, you know, we can afford the house now. our situation stabilized, so I gave them the house back and it was fine. But most of them were like, well, you know, we moved out of state, or we can't, you know, we're not gonna be able to afford the payments either. Just do the best that you can, and whatever happens, happens. And you have to understand, when you're doing subject to deals, these are, I mean, for somebody to give you a house and trust that you're gonna make a payment, what's their alternative? Their alternative, most of these folks would have been ultimately losing the house anyway.
Right.
Foreclosure. So basically, in hindsight, all I did was extend the inevitable for these folks anyway, and most of them were having, a lot of them went to, actually a lot of them went bankrupt in between. And you were asking about the due on sale clause. Well, see, when they file bankruptcy, according to our paperwork, they're not allowed to include the house. But guess what everyone does?
Of course
They include the house because their attorney tells them to. It doesn't matter what this contract says, but guess what? Guess who's making that payment on time? Guess who their only creditor on their credit report that's getting paid right now is? It's the bank. I've had probably 8 or 10 properties that I bought subject to that the seller ultimately went into bankruptcy anyway, not through no fault of mine. I already bailed them out of the house, but just with their credit cards and cost of living, they couldn't survive. They filed bankruptcy. The banks were notified of the bankruptcy, and they still did not call the note due. That's incredible. That's incredible. But
Because they were getting paid.
They were getting paid. See,
They
that's
didn't
the
care.
thing. They're getting paid. They don't care. The due on sale clause is a boogeyman. One day, if interest rates go up, it may come into play. But right now, it doesn't mean anything, in my experience.
Yeah.
But you know, results not typical. Your mileage may vary.
Right.
We had one private lender, and he's here in the Columbus Central Ohio area, and he did have one of his notes called due because he transferred it, I think, from his personal name to his LLC. And he got the letter, and he had 9 months to either transfer it back or pay it back. And that's the only one that I've ever heard of. And I think it was a local bank here in town, and I don't remember which one. But I was just curious if other people were having the same, seeing the same things that he went through.
Nobody that I've worked with, that I know of, investors and landlords, or myself included, has that happened with. And there's actually a provision, with all due respect to the person, we won't mention, I don't want you to mention who that person might be, but especially if it's somebody that maybe you work with closely. But what I would say is they made a mistake. Instead of putting it in their LLC, what they should have done is they should have put it in a trust for estate planning purposes. Under the 1980 Garden St. Germain Act, that's exempt.
Yeah.
The bank could not have foreclosed. And I'm not giving legal advice here. Talk to your attorney. But I'm telling you, from spending thousands and thousands of dollars over the years on legal fees, and having 4 different attorneys, including a former attorney general, go through my paperwork with a fine-tooth comb. I mean, nothing's perfect. There's no such thing as bulletproof in the legal system, but this is as close, my paperwork is as close as you can get to that, and I've paid to have that, and it's been tested in court multiple times through eviction court and other things.
So one of the things you said, not on the mic, but earlier when we were talking, is that
No, we can't talk about the off mic stuff, Brian.
you know, having extra tools in your tool belt, as far as every investor that invests in real estate should have some lease options in their portfolio. I'm just curious why you think that.
Well, that's an opinion, and it's a very subjective opinion.
Yeah, sure. I'm just curious what brings you to that.
And I love that question, and I get that a lot, especially when I'm speaking in front of groups. And the reason for that is because what I want control, but I don't want responsibility. I want as much control as I can get, which I do through owning the property, and I want to delegate as much of the responsibility. And with a lease with option to purchase, this is what this is, Brian. What a tenant buyer is saying to me is, hey, I want to own this I'd love to own this property and be a homeowner. Can you help me do that while I work on my credit, while I build up a down payment, while I get more time on the job since I just transferred here from New York?
So
will you help me, Brian Urbanski? And I'm like, yes, I can.
Yeah, so why wouldn't you do that through like a land contract?
Well, that's
that actually gives them full, more ownership, more interest in, taking care of the property.
Well, you're absolutely correct, but I don't do land contracts, also called contract for deed for your listeners that might be in other states. And I don't even do lease purchases, because here's why. Lease option is unilateral. What that means is I have to sell you the house, but you don't have to buy it. On a lease purchase or land contract or contract for deed, that's an entirely different animal, because that's bilateral. And what that means is I'm expecting you, Mr. Tenant Buyer, to, I call my lease option, or if I did land contracts, I'd still call them tenant buyers because it's still kind of a rent to own. I would be expecting them to buy that property, and if they don't, there's a penalty for them not performing as
Right.
agreed. Okay, so with a lease with option to purchase, I treat that in my paperwork, I treat it as a land contract because they are responsible for all the maintenance, and they're also, I charge fair market rent, plus I add on the taxes and the insurance. And you're probably like, well, wait a minute, how are you able to do that? And it's because what I'm looking for is the mentality of the person I'm doing business with, this future homeowner. I would rather deal with somebody with a homeowner's mentality than with a tenant mentality. And in all of my deals, they're responsible for all of the maintenance. We don't so much as come out and change a light bulb. Now, legally, let me make a disclaimer here. Legally, I'm a landlord. Legally, they're a tenant. If they were ever to say to me, you know what, Brian, you know what, this is a lease with option to purchase, and the furnace went out, you got to fix it. I would say to them, well, here's what's going to happen. In our paperwork on page 3 of the option agreement, here's what's going to happen. If I come out and fix it, you can compel me to do that, Mr. Tenant Buyer, but if I do that, that nullifies your option agreement, and when my guy comes out there to fix that, you're going to get a certified letter from me telling you that you're in breach of your agreement, your option is hereby canceled, and when your lease is up, we're not renewing it, you're gone. So I will fix that furnace for you if you would like me to fix it, but it's going to terminate your option and you will not be able to buy this property. And I've had that happen exactly one time, where somebody said it was a major repair, and they weren't gonna buy it anyway, and they were planning on moving as soon as the lease was up anyway. So they were like, well, you need to fix this thing. So in, I don't know, I've had probably 140 or so, 130, 150, somewhere. I've had a lot of tenant buyers over the years. That's happened one time, and that was with the situation where they were planning on moving anyway. So what it does, what the lease with option to purchase does for me, it allows me to get a higher than market rent, sell it for higher than current market value, building in that appreciation, and they're paying my taxes and the insurance. So what do you think that does to my cash flow when my taxes and my insurance are being paid?
It's way high.
It helps a lot,
Yeah.
and especially one of the things I really like doing, I love, you guys are gonna cringe when you hear this, most of the deals I've done have been, the sub 2 deals have been in the nicer neighborhoods. They're 100,000 and up properties, but I love doing them in the Hilltop. And here in Columbus, that's a working class neighborhood. And North Linden is a working class neighborhood. You can do those deals every day of the week and twice on Sunday. I'm telling you, you know, so many people walk away from these areas because they're afraid of them. They're like, oh, well, that's, you know, it's, you got problems and, you know, lower class people and drugs and all these different things. Well, yeah, you do. You have to buy correctly. I mean, there are places in town I won't buy.
Sure.
Okay, not many, but they're out there. But when you're doing a lease with option to purchase, there are people living in that neighborhood. I don't care what the neighborhood is. You got people living on that street and on that block and in that neighborhood that rent, that would like to own. And a lot of these are good, hardworking people.
Right.
A lot of them tend to be immigrants. A lot of them tend to be blue collar,
Right.
white, black, Hispanic, Asian, every flavor and color of the rainbow live here. And given the opportunity to rent or to own, what do you think they would prefer to do? They prefer to own, in most cases, not every case, but in most, or at least say many cases. And when we put a sign in the yard, that sign has a unique phone number on it. Particularly in a working class area, our phone, I mean, genuinely rings off the hook. We're usually getting 8 to 10 calls a day for the first week in an area like that, if it has any traffic at all on it, simply because these opportunities aren't around. And there are people, you'd be surprised that people are driving around a 20-year-old pickup truck. They've got $5,000 or $8,000 or $10,000 under the mattress because they don't trust banks, because where they come from,
Right.
Their banking system's even worse than ours, if you can fathom that.
So this kind of leads to one of the questions that I had, which was, do you only do lease options when you get a subject to? Or do you also do lease options if you originally paid cash for the property, or if you, let's say, pay cash and got a good 30-year fixed loan on it or something like that? Because, I mean, in these neighborhoods, I think you could probably pick them up for 10, maybe put a little bit into them, maybe not, and sell them to, somebody who's a handyman special who might give you $5,000 down.
Absolutely.
And pay 40, 50 grand for it or something like that?
Well, I don't even look at the price. They don't. Nobody cares about price. Here's a myth. that you can't sell a property for X dollars. You can sell a property for whatever you want, depending on how you're financing it. I don't sell the property based on the price. I sell a property based on the payment. Here's one of the things that I'll do. The answer to your question is yes. I do subject to, I do private lending. I typically don't work with hard money lenders because I don't have to at this stage. I did in the past, but I know enough people and I've raised enough capital to be fortunate enough to have resources to do deals that I couldn't have done earlier on. But it doesn't matter how I'm buying them. Obviously, if I'm paying a high rate of interest, I would probably want to refi out of that. But a lot of these deals, my favorite type of deal to do is a subject to or a seller finance deal. And you can find those all over the place. I can do hard money. Matter of fact, I got a deal right now, 6.99% fixed. It's a private lender who lent money to this lady who hasn't paid for, I don't know, 3 or 4 or 5 months now, and she's 2 doors down from the house I just finished rehabbing. That's how I know. My back of my truck says I buy houses, and she saw that and she said, "How does this work?" I was literally sitting in the street getting ready to leave, and she comes up and we had a little powwow there for 10 or 15 minutes, and next thing I know, it was privately financed. And I talked to the mortgage lender. He and his partner were actual mortgage brokers, and they actually lend their own money out. And he was like, "Yeah, you can take this over." He even offered me a 5% discount on the note, and it's 10 years into it. It's a 30-year amortization that's already got 10 years paid. And I'm like, at 6.99%, I can make those numbers work. And he's willing to let me take it over, no qualifying or anything, because he doesn't want to have to. He's older, and he doesn't want to have to foreclose or anything, and he knows he's got equity. The property's probably worth $125. And there's a $70,000 mortgage at 6.99%. Why would I pay that off? You know what I'm saying? But to answer your question, it's just every deal is different. It depends on the interest rate. But if there's a lot of equity in it, it might make sense, like this deal does. I mean, 6.99% for an investor, that's a great rate. And 10 years, we're already into like the 11th year on an amortization schedule, which means for people that maybe not be familiar with amortization schedules, the sooner you make, the first payments don't pay as much principal as the later payments do. And so, a third of this mortgage of the payments are already paid off, so the principal is higher than it would be if it was just 2 or 3 years old.
So I was curious, as what's your end game here? Like, I mean, as you get 50, 60 years old, I don't really know how old you are at this point.
You're too kind. As I get to 50.
What's the end game?
Well, for me, it's the game itself. I mean, I look at this business. This business for me is a lot of fun. Lease options is a way for me to do my single-family properties. My multifamilies, obviously, I couldn't. You can't really do that. You can do a master lease, but then you get into all kinds of other issues, and you can't. I don't want to have a 15 or 20 unit apartment building and have somebody else that I'm doing a master lease to, because I don't know who's moving into the property that I own, that I'm leasing to them, that they're doing basically what's called a sandwich lease option. That's when you do a lease option with the owner, and then you lease option it to somebody else, and you try to make a spread in the middle. I don't do those at all. In fact, if I'm going to buy, I'm either buying all cash or I'm buying subject to or seller financing. But at the end of the day, I'm getting the deed. So I want to make a strong point here. And when you are buying properties, this is my opinion, always get the deed. I would never do a lease option as a buyer. I only do lease options to my end buyers, my tenant buyers. When I'm buying, I'm either buying all cash, seller financing, or subject to. And subject to is basically seller financing, but when I say seller financing, I mean they have no mortgage, and I'm paying them personally because they don't want the capital gains, they want the cash flow, and I'm not paying their bank. So I kind of differentiate into 3 categories, except 2 of them are essentially the same with the seller financing. So my end game is to continue acquiring single families. At this stage right now, I'm less interested in buying the onesie-twosies. I'm working with other institutional investors, some bigger players. I know a number of people just from being around for doing this full time for 15 years. I know some pretty successful investors, and we're looking at, we have funds available to us through hedge funds and through Asian and offshore investors. Legitimate offshore investors. This isn't like the New York City, Manhattan money laundering thing. there's just a lot of money that is in the economy that we have, which is very volatile and interconnected. There's risk everywhere and volatility everywhere, but there's more in other countries than there is here. And it's surprising when you go out, and I'm actually writing a book, I'm reading 3 books, but one of them is about private lending. And it's stunning how much capital is out there, and people just don't know where to look for it. And when they find it, they don't know what to say, and they don't know what the lenders are looking for in terms of feeling confident in lending money to these individuals and these investors. But with the capital being there, today I'm really looking the multifamily space, which is a space I'd like to get into more than I have. It's just too ultra competitive. I mean, I'm not 6 or 8% cap rate is not something I'm interested in.
We're having the same issues right now. I think everybody looking for multifamily in Columbus.
Good luck.
And any growing city is having the same issue.
Well, and in the areas where you can get the deals, I don't want to manage anyway. Right. And I don't know that I want to do a 1.5 or $2 million rehab. I just looked at a 121 unit complex. I think half the city of Columbus has looked at over on the east side.
It's been going around. It's
been going around, yeah, to say the least. And I actually took one of my Asian lenders there, and we walked the whole property on a Sunday afternoon. And for what the proposed, end use of residential did not make sense. It should have been turned into like an assisted living facility or something, because they're almost all 1 bedroom or studio apartments, no second floor, no basements, everything. 17 buildings on slabs. That's what it was designed for. And somebody's trying to put a square peg in a round hole. It just isn't going to work. So. Right. I love the game. I love doing the deals, and a lot of people say that they want to, they're looking forward to retiring. I don't. I'm not saying that I won't. I'm sure as the years go by, I'll spend less time in the business and more time doing other things. But this is a passion for me. I mean, I love what I do. I see myself doing it way past the retirement age, just for the fun of it. And the way I do deals is changing. Instead of buying 1 or 2 or 3 houses at a time, the partners I'm working with now, we're buying tracts. We're buying 20 or 30, or we're getting involved in deals that are right now that's kind of popular. And in fact, one of the speakers at your group at the Central Ohio Investors Network, Mike Rodriguez, is with a company that's doing ready to rent properties in actual developments where they're building 50 houses at one time that they're going to rent out, and for the sole purpose of building these single-family homes as rental properties. Those are the kinds of opportunities that we're looking at today. And as the market changes, in the seller's market, you want to sell. It's real simple to make money in our business, but it's hard in the real world. Buy low, sell high. Works every single time, but why don't we do that? Because when the market's high, we get greedy and we want to hold, and when the market's low, we get fearful and we want to sell. And I've sold a lot of the properties that I thought I'd be holding a lot longer because of the ridiculous prices I'm getting from out-of-state and out-of-country buyers. I mean, I've got seven or 8 active buyers from Israel alone on my buyers list. I've got a couple from Canada, some from all over the United States, but 3 other countries that are looking to buy here. They have very specific criteria that they're looking for, which is hard to get for them, but at the prices they're looking to pay. But there's a lot of interest in the U.S. real estate market, and especially in Columbus. We're like the 2nd best real estate investing market according to the National Board of Realtors, only behind, I think, Austin, Texas. And that was as of, I think, August of this year. The National Association of Realtors said that we're bigger than San Diego and Miami, or not bigger, but better. So whatever the criteria they use is, there's a lot of activity going on here. And I think over time, we're probably going to see some kind of a slowdown. I don't think it's going to be to the degree we saw in 2008, but I think we're going to see a shift. I think opportunities that we're having a hard time finding now, the high equity deals, are going to come back, and I think it's going to be a lot easier to do creative financing, like subject to and lease options, and be able to get more creative than having to just do all cash all the time.
Right. That's great. Yeah, we actually had Mike in last week, and so he's the episode right prior to you, and we haven't released it yet. So, I don't know if we talked about the tracts of land and stuff that people are buying up and doing 50 houses at a time or something. I don't think we talked about on the podcast, but he does go through some of the statistics that you mentioned on how great Columbus is, and really Central Ohio for investors both in state and out of state.
Oh, absolutely, and I think it's just, our market, the economy itself is ever changing, And I think as we go through our up cycles and down cycles, there's never a bad time, in my opinion, to invest in real estate. There's a bad time to be holding, a bad time to be selling, a bad time to be doing different aspects of it. But it's never a bad time to be in the market. And when I started, I only knew an up market until it turned, and I got crushed, but I survived. Good Lord willing, and the creek don't rise, I'm still here. And now, what I learned from the downturn, if I would have known then what I know now, it would, my goodness, it would have been a much more exciting time than it was, and it wasn't very exciting, by the way. So I'm not hoping for a market downturn, but we do so much better. And easier. It's just easier to do deals. We can do lease options all the time. That market never goes away because there are always people that want to own homes that can't. And for me, my exit strategy on the single families is always lease options, because I make more money and I have less hassle consistently, and I'm dealing with a higher quality tenant. I don't think a regular tenant compares. And as far as being worried about selling my properties off, statistically, and I'm a little saddened by this, but statistically I know that life is going to interrupt the plans of my tenant buyers more often than not. And if it happens, it happens. So I want your listeners to also understand that just because you're doing a lease option, don't think all of the properties you have are going to be cashed out in 2 years or 3 years. I do 1 year, 2 year, and 3 year lease options depending on the situation and how much that the seller puts down or the tenant buyer puts down. But at the end of the day, it just doesn't matter. Just like people lose properties to foreclosure because they go through divorce, they lose properties to evictions because they go through divorce, and from losing their job, and from getting sick and hurt and other things.
Right, that's good stuff. So as we come to a close, do you have anything else to share with our listeners?
Well, I love the business. It's a lot of fun. It's not a glamorous or sexy business, but for me it's challenging. I think the most important focus that investors, newer or experienced, should maintain is that sales and marketing even marketing number one and sales number two in that order are really where it's at. That's where the money is. If you can beat the bushes, however you do that, whatever marketing strategies that you use, or driving for dollars, whatever, I think you will always be able to make money, whether the market's going up or down or sideways, if you focus on that. And don't, there are so many different ways to do deals. People come to me and say, I'm a wholesaler, or I'm buy and hold, or I'm like, why are you limiting your opportunity? Mm-hmm. I started as buy and hold, but I went kicking and screaming into rehabs and foreclosure litigation and zombie foreclosures and wholesaling and all these other different things. What I do is, and this is what I suggest to your listeners that are, even if they have some experience in it, don't try to force the property into what you want it to be. Let the property tell you whether it's a wholesale deal, whether it's a subject to or a lease option or a fix and flip or whatever. And know that no matter what the economy is doing, there's always opportunity out there. And if there's one thing I could do differently, is I would have probably gotten a mentor a lot, or I would have looked for mentors a lot sooner than I did, and I would have investigated and gotten involved with private lending a lot sooner than I did. If I could wave a magic wand and change those two things, my trajectory would have been a lot different. Yeah. I'm still very happy with where I ended up, and my daughter is hopefully, she's 12, and she's hopefully going to take the reins here one day, but she comes to meetings with me and helps on the properties and stuff a little bit, and even helps in the marketing department. So it's pretty exciting. So my long-term strategy is to hand off a business to my daughter, who will take the reins one day.
Excellent.
And blow it up, no doubt.
And spend all the money.
In a good way.
Yeah, in a good way.
Oh, I thought you would
No,
cash
I mean,
out all
like,
my deals.
I think about that for my kids too, and I hope that I hand them something that they can make twice or 3 times better than I ever did.
Well, and it's not just the growth, Brian. It's I hope I can transfer the passion to her, because this is a lone wolf business. This is not an easy business. You're dealing with problematic tenants, problematic contractors, and economies, and banks, and there's so many things. Most people just look at real estate as a vehicle for making money, and they hate everything else about it. Yeah. And to a big extent, there's a lot of money that you can make. But I don't want to get up every day hating what I do until I'm 65 and sell the business or cash my properties out. Yeah. I want to have fun today.
And I think we definitely go and approach all of our situations and how can we help someone solve a problem.
That's it.
We want to enter into their broken situation and help them find a fix. And a lot of people, they experience, you know, like we've talked about a lot, even in this last hour, is just a lot of brokenness we enter into and life situations that aren't fun for people to go through. And the house is a burden, and how can we help them through that and in a way that makes sense for us too?
I couldn't have put it better. We are, as investors, we are the cleanup crew for people whose lives are a mess.
Yeah.
And we can't solve all their problems, but we can take a big burden off of them. And that's really who we want to work with. We only want to work with those highly motivated sellers that have a problem we can help. If they don't have a problem I can help, I cheerfully refer them to a realtor, or just tell them to stay, or just keep renting it out, or do whatever you're doing. You don't need me.
Right. That's good.
Brian, where can our listeners find more about you?
They could, I'm not real big online, and I know that's kind of like sacrilege in today's world. I have, my website is abbreyhomes.com, which is that's my public company. I have a bunch of behind the scenes holding companies and things, and I use a lot of trust. But abbreyhomes.com, or if they want to contact me directly, they can reach me at area code 614-306-3400 if they have a sales and marketing question or a question on lease options. I'd be glad to answer that, or if it'd be easier for them to send me an email, they can reach me at Brian@Abbrey Homes, and that's spelled A-B as in boy, REYHOMES.com.
And do you spell Brian with an I or a Y?
Oh, thank you, Brian, and I should know that. I'll get it either way, but it's with an I. Thank you.
Call.
Yeah, thank you for, it's B-R-I-A-N. I normally do that, and I probably should have. But thanks, Brian.
Yeah.
Thank you, Brian Urbanski, for being here. We really enjoyed it. And thank you to our listeners for tuning in.
Thank you. I had a great time.
Appreciate it.